Hello and welcome back to the Final Straight F1 podcast, again with Ben and Tonda.
And today we're looking at the story of the Canadian Grand Prix.
Let's dive into it. And we've got quite a lot to talk about, and I think it would be only fair to begin with what happened even before the race weekend, right? We've had two major announcements, or three if you want to count the 2026 regulations. The first one being, I'm not sure in which order it came, but the first major announcement is that Sergio Perez, he has announced a 2-year contract extension with Red Bull. Which, after this weekend, I think he is a very lucky boy.
Even the previous one, I mean, it's a 1+1, I think, and at first he wanted a 2-year one, right? Then they refused. They said, we will give you a year. I guess there was some back and forth, some negotiating going on behind the scenes, but I don't know if it's surprising because I guess the setup works for them. But it has, because they've had such a dominant car and Max has been so dominant. And with how many points each team has been getting in the past two races, with McLaren being far ahead of Mercedes, Red Bull and Ferrari, we might just see a pretty close Constructors' Championship fight. And if they lose it because of Perez and his, inability to get out of Q1 or Q2 or his crashes, then I think they will come to regret this decision.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, we all know that a contract with Red Bull is not the safest contract out there.
True.
You might still have Helmut Marko, demoting him to the RB. But I mean, the first speculations were that he would only get 1-year contract extension. And then it was, I think it's still unsure whether or not it's a 1+1. But many people say it's 1+1, many people say it's 2-year. But it doesn't matter. One thing is for sure. Also, Yuki Tsunoda.
Yep.
That was during the race weekend, I believe. He extended his contract by 1 year with the RB, with the V-Carb. So the only seat that is left to decide in the Red Bull family is the seat of, right now, Daniel Ricciardo or your brother, Liam Lawson.
Yeah, and I mean, we've talked about this before. Liam Lawson really wants that seat because he wants to get into F1. We've seen him be capable of driving in F1. He got points, right, last season. And it's a tough situation because a lot of people assume that they would get rid of Perez. They wouldn't extend his contract. So we would possibly see either Daniel Ricciardo or even Yuki Tsunoda move up into the Red Bull seat, or somebody fresh like Fernando Alonso. And then potentially Liam Lawson could have moved up into to being a full-time driver. But now it doesn't seem like that will happen, with seats filling up. So the question is, will Daniel Ricciardo stay at RB or will he be replaced with Liam Lawson?
I think that very well depends on the rest of the season. And I think that, there for Liam Lawson, it is pretty clear, right? I think he has until September of this year, because he has a contract with the Red Bull family, that unless he gets a full-time F1 seat with them until September, then he's free for any other team on F1.
Yeah.
And don't get me wrong, but I think Liam Lawson is, he would be in a pretty good position just to get into any other team basically that is free. At this moment, it doesn't look that easy to go into any other seat because the silly season is really getting out of hand. But
yeah,
I still think there's going to be many teams that are going to want Liam Lawson signed and in a seat. So yeah, and it's pretty clear that it's between Ricciardo and Lawson because there's nobody else really who's going to fulfill that seat. And funnily enough, I heard a pretty funny story where Helmut Marko said that when they were renaming the team of, from AlphaTauri to the Visa Cash App Racing Bulls RB, stands the same as, Racing Bulls, also stands for Red Bull. And when he was told he was going to race for RB, he thought, Yuki Tsunoda thought for a second that he was going to get promoted. But yeah,
Well,
not happening this year.
that's what you get with these weird naming conventions. But there
True.
are not a lot of free seats left for Liam Lawson to take, because we know that, Williams might be looking at Carlos Sainz as a potential replacement for Logan Sargent next year. There have been talks about a 4-year contract with the option to, leave after 2 years if the Williams project isn't looking like it's going somewhere. There's also, the Haas rumors, because another biggest announcement was Esteban Ocon leaving Alpine at the end of this season.
Which I'm not surprised at completely, after the Monaco incident, they have quite clearly fell out of love. So
Yeah.
and as you say, the rumors just point at Ocon going to the Haas team, which I don't know. You have different brands of tractors, but we don't seem to brag about one being better than the other. Well, we'll see. But I think that Gasly has not signed the contract yet as well. So both Alpine seats are technically up for grabs, as well as for Haas, both seats. One at Kick Sauber, technically one at Aston Martin, but we know how that will.
Well,
follow
Ollie
through.
Behrman has reportedly signed with Haas for next season.
Okay. I mean, he is speculated to go in that seat, but sure, that's interesting.
So
I think he's a clear candidate after, showing what he's capable of at Jeddah with the Ferrari team. So
true. But there's also been talks about, Guan Yu Zhou going to Haas with his $30 million backing, which is not a small amount.
And Haas needs that money. Haas is a team that absolutely needs the money. And Joe, don't get me wrong, I don't think he is a championship material. He's not beating Bottas on a regular occasion, and we know that Bottas himself wasn't a championship contender really. So, but he's not a Latifi, right? So I think he would be pretty useful to Haas, unless he goes into the position of Latifi where he crashes for more cash, for the repair costs are going to exceed the sponsor money. But speaking of sponsor money, I think that's something that Red Bull is going to need soon. And that's why they signed Sergio Perez, right? Like, he has a huge backing in his sponsorship from Mexico, and he's spending it quite, indecisively, in the recent days. A few crashes, Monaco, now Canada, but we'll get to that later. But yeah, I think that the sponsor games are pretty important, mainly with the, even people think that with the budget cap, the teams don't care, but at the end of the day, these teams still are operating and they still need to make money somehow. So it is very important. And Red Bull, for example, this is their marketing, right? Their energy drink company. So this is a part of their marketing. So they need to see the return on their investment. So, and if Checo is doing that, I think they're also going to get a bit pressured from Red Bull that their sales are high, meaning that, that's the point of them being in the sport. So, yeah, I mean, I think these decisions are not only purely based off performance, and I think we all kind of know that. So, the seats are going to be very interesting, for sure. And as you say, Sainz has been reportedly offered a 4-year contract or something like that at Williams. And another contract that has been rumored about a lot is Adrian Newey. Apparently, he has already signed for Ferrari from 25 to 27 for about $105 million during this period. So, we'll see. A lot of speculation, a lot of excitement. But let's dive into what actually happened.
Well, right from the start, right from the first free practice session, it was a mess. The mixed conditions, the rain, some of the teams weren't able to get a proper read on the tire compounds, and that led to some disastrous results, especially for Ferrari, who, I mean, after winning in Monaco, you would have expected them to be gunning at the for the for the podium at least, if not for the win. And here we saw a double DNF for the team from Maranello, and it's just heartbreaking, just seeing Leclerc pit for Harts right before it started to rain. It really felt like the Ferrari of old again. With we are checking, we are not sure.
Yeah.
The strategy calls just didn't fit the situation. But other than that, we saw this was a busy weekend, even just the race. I mean, compared to last race, Monaco, where we had nothing to talk about, this was an eventful one.
Yeah, I mean, quite the polar opposite races, right? Like Ferrari on top versus Ferrari at the complete bottom. Yeah, and like myself included, I expected Ferrari to be very good because Ferrari's like this track really played into Ferrari's strengths. It had quite a few traction zones, and we know that Ferrari is very good on putting down the traction, hence why they were so good in Monaco as well. And they couldn't quite find their feet. It was also because of the changeable conditions. Like I don't think either Sainz or Leclerc, they're amazing in the rain. Dare I say, like their weaknesses lie in the rain, because whenever there has been a wet race, one of those two has done a little whoopsie, so didn't help for sure. But yeah, still, Max Verstappen in the practice session, he had I don't know if it was an engine failure, but he replaced a component in his engine, and I think it was either MGUK or Energy Store, something like this. So either the engine or the component that generates electricity back from motion, and they could not recover it, apparently. So I don't know if you have 2 or 3 in one season, of these components of the MGUK, but at this rate, when he had to replace it, it seems like he's gonna face a grid penalty no matter what. Like he won't be able to get to the end of the season with only his remaining components. So there is something that quite well set up the race. He didn't really do much practice. So we then came to qualifying, right? And the order, it seemed like Mercedes were rising, but we all know that Mercedes have been pretty good in practice this year, but then come qualifying, the tires and the car was just not working. And this time it did, but only for one of the drivers. And George Russell took pole position, which was quite insane because he took pole position with the same time as Max Verstappen. And he only got it because Max Verstappen set it second. So I really wonder what would be it was 0.000. I wonder what the next number was. Apparently they really keep it. They actually track the number. So somebody knows. And this is the same situation. I don't know if you saw, I think it was in 1997, where there were 3 drivers that set the same time for pole position. It was Villeneuve, it was Schumacher, which were the 2 title rivals, and it was the final race, and they had to decide the championship in that race, and it was Frentzen. And it was Villeneuve P1, Schumacher P2, Frentzen P3, just purely because of the, time when they said the times. And they said the same thing. They were like, well, somebody knows the 4th number, and they're not telling it, so we really wonder how it really was, right? So we will never know.
No, the margins were crazy small. Even down the line, down the order, the gaps weren't as big. But yeah, first in Q1, we saw Sergio Perez get out again. he didn't make it very far. Not even in the race, but then then came a big shock in the form of both Ferraris, getting out in Q2. So Charles Leclerc, who's been very consistent and has been in the top 4 up until this race, came a big hit, and because of a poor choice of a tire compound, I'm pretty sure they didn't manage to set the time, and they ended up being 11th and 12th, and both V-Carps made it into the top 10, with Daniel Ricciardo even getting P5.
Yeah, Daniel Ricciardo, like, props to him. Top 5 in that car, and with these margins, right? Like, he was 2/10 off pole position.
Yeah.
Which is insane. Like, in that car, to be 2/10 off, it just shows again, I'm not gonna bring it up much, but it shows again how incredible it is when we reach the peak of the generations of the cars. It's just something else. Like, you get so much closer racing. It's insane. Like, with these margins, it's incredible. And Ferrari, it was a bit of a tragedy, right? With the tires, and it was so unexpected as well. Like, they had no pace. It didn't matter, like, if it was dry, wet, softs, mediums, hards. They just couldn't find their feet, like, at all. Which, from this car, you would expect that with these upgrades they had and everything, that their base of the car would be pretty good. And it didn't seem like the drivers struggled a lot, like, to fight the car. It just genuinely seemed like they lacked pace, which is pretty scary,
Yeah. I think there was a problem. I think it was the setup mainly. I think the upgrades work overall, but they really need to understand it each weekend to be able to, be competent. And especially with Leclerc having a power unit issue as well, which cost him like 80 horsepower per lap.
Was half a second down the straights.
Yeah, even more possibly.
That's insane.
For like 15 laps. It was tragic. So, when you combine all of these, like, not enough practice to set up the car properly, technical issues, and then a bad strategy call, it just makes for, it really just shows how many things need to be in order for everything to work. And when multiple points of failure just, fall, you're left with 0 points and a double DNF.
Yeah, and like, one DNF of Leclerc, I mean, yeah, happens. They rolled the dice and it didn't happen.
Yeah.
And I think it's better they retired the car because he had the issues as well. And let's just why put mileage on the engines with such limited quantities we have nowadays. But Carlos Sainz, he had a very bad whoopsie with his potential future team.
Yeah.
I haven't seen an incident like this for a long time. But the last time I remember it was, I think it was George Russell and Antonio Giovinazzi. Russell was in Williams, funnily enough. And Giovinazzi was in a Ferrari-powered car. Sauber or Alfa Romeo it was like 2019, 2020-ish, somewhere around there. And it was the same. Like, somebody spun. I think it was Giovinazzi who spun. He crashed. And then Russell tried to, go around. And then I think he hit the tire, and the tire then destroyed his wheel, and it fell off, and the suspension broke, and then he just crashed. So this was the same thing. Albon tried to just move, and then he just Sainz just didn't hold the brake, and he just reversed back into Albon, basically. So that was a weekend to forget for not only the Scuderia, but also for the Tifosi.
No,
pretty bad.
Definitely. But honestly, it wasn't a bad strategy call. Like, the gamble with the hearts, I think because it looked like there was the option, there was the possibility of it not raining again. And if that happened, I think it would have worked out pretty well. But, you can't control the weather. And he was just stuck there with hearts in the rain. Then he was a lap behind. But it would have been fun to see the strategy work out, after everything, but just wasn't meant to be.
Yep. Plus, the hard tires, they're hard to warm up. And in these conditions where you have only one dry line, it's enough to just go, millimeters from the dry line. And you just, first of all, your tires get cold and they get, water on them. And it's not good. But also, arguably, it wasn't a bad strategy call. And I liked the engineer of Leclerc, like saying, I don't know if you heard the radio, but he said, like, okay, well, we need to just do something, because he said, we're shit anyways.
Yeah.
So we might as well do something, right? So, and I agree, but arguably if he went for inters and he would be, I don't know, like P11, P12, P13 even, then there was the safety car, right? So he could put on, the soft tires, medium tires, whatever tires would be suited in that time. And they apparently did solve their power unit issues, so he would be, better suited to overtake, and could have gotten some points, but who knows really? Like, they tried it. I think it's a good thing, but they failed, unfortunately.
Well, but we also mentioned Albon in relation to the incident with Sainz. But Albon had another moment in the race, and I think arguably it might just be one of the best overtakes we see all season. I know it's still early, but the double overtake that he did, it was incredible.
It was awesome. Like, I remember seeing the live, TV showing it, and I was like, oh my god, he's gonna, I don't know, he was overtaking, but it was two cars, right?
Ricciardo was one of them.
He had a car on his right. Yeah, Ricciardo was one of them. I think it was the first one, and then someone ahead. An Alpine, probably. It was Ocon or Gasly, so let's just say Ricciardo was the first car, right? So he overtook him. He went for the dry line, and then he was braking. He was getting very, very close to that Alpine. And we were thinking, right, like, he's just gonna plow into him, but he did what he did when he was in Red Bull. He actually raced Norris in Suzuka. It was 2019 or 2020, and he started to overtake Norris, but then he saw that Norris is starting to turn in, so he just released the brake and he just sent it. And it just looked exactly the same, except, the wet weather, and it was an absolutely amazing overtake. I was all for it. And he made it stick, so no contact, anything. So, yeah, that was solid. And, like, so far, I think this is the overtake of the season, at least so far. We'll see if someone can pip that to the line, but yeah, that was amazing. And he had a pretty good weekend until the incident.
It was ended prematurely, but props to him anyway. But, another very important thing about this race, though, I think, was that we basically had a three-way battle for the win. And that's something that we haven't seen in a long time.
We had seen Max Verstappen being overtaken, and we did not see that. I'm not kidding. We didn't see it for over a year. I'm sure. Like, there is no way. He didn't get overtaken in Australia basically because he had the issue. So he got overtaken, but not on pure pace, right? He had this issue. And in Miami, it was the safety car. In Monaco, he never really moved anywhere. And in Singapore last year, he just moved forwards. So from his starting position. And so, yeah, can't remember the last time Verstappen being overtaken on pure pace.
Might be the start of the 2022 season with the fight with Leclerc in, I don't even remember when there was the fight in Saudi Arabia. I don't know if that was, I doubt that was the last time, but I think Austria. Yeah, maybe.
Austria. Then also Leclerc overtook him, but then like maybe Brazil, but I don't know if he was even overtaken. So it was like, wow, like what are we seeing? What's happening, right? Like, because it just looked like Russell is controlling the pace, and he was doing a great job. He was going pretty quick from the get-go, so Like for me, like my indicator was like, okay, well, he's gonna burn off the tires quite quickly. But as we've seen, for example, races like Turkey, right? Like the intermediates, they can kind of go to the slicks. You can make slicks out of them, and they don't really lose pace. So I was thinking, it might not be such an issue, but we clearly saw the crossover period, right? Then there was rain forecasted again, so they couldn't quite change for the dry tires, so they were kind of like checkmate, right? They had to stay out on the worn tires, and then when the rain hits, probably pit for another inters, because these inters they have no groove. They're just basically going to slicks. And right, so Norris was losing out a bit.
Yeah.
I believe like he was a bit behind, but then he started to close in like super rapidly. And I think before we mention them, we need to talk about the first few laps with the Haas. The Haas were the only ones who put on the extreme wet tires, and laugh all you want, like even though they ended up how they ended up, and they still, even after they had to pit quite early, they were like 3 or 4 seconds per lap faster for the first few laps. Like Magnussen went from P14 to P4.
Yeah,
that was entertainment right from the get-go, and I was all for it. That was so brave. That was brave, and I really enjoyed that.
No, it was amazing to see. And I was surprised that more teams didn't go for it. I mean, of course, it didn't work out in the end, but at the start, with the heavy rain that they saw, it just made sense to go with the full wets. And yeah, it was just a bummer that the strategy didn't really pay off that much. But yeah, I mean, I was, for a minute, I couldn't remember what you meant by the Haas strategy, because just so much happened during the whole race. But yeah.
Yeah.
Kevin Magnussen, Nico Hülkenberg just overtaking everybody was very fun. But then they were holding up. There was like a train behind Nico Hülkenberg, right? Including the Ferrari drivers as well. It was and also like it really feels like this race had everything, because we also saw Lewis Hamilton fight Fernando Alonso in the opening stages of the race.
That is true. It felt like 2007 again. So, and he was, Aston Martin, like, I expected them to be quicker in Canada, because it's like last year it suited them pretty well, because quite a few traction zones, which was something that Aston was good at. I'm not sure if they're now. Seems like not as much. But yeah, we saw Hamilton being quite held up by Alonso. And then he couldn't overtake him because, it was exactly like the start. Everything was awesome. We had the Haas, we had, Verstappen on Russell and Norris closing in. But yeah, we all knew that these transition races from wet to dry, they have one big drawback, and that's the dry line.
Yeah.
Right? Like when you have worn or even slightly worn intermediate tires, you have one dry line. If the driver that's getting overtaken just sticks to that line, there's no way anyone's overtaking you outside that dry line. If they go into that swamp of water, there's no way they're outbraking you. So yeah, that was a period of the race which I was quite conscious that's going to happen, and I knew it, but I was quite afraid that it's going to stay that like a long time, like it was in Imola a few years ago, where you just couldn't overtake. But it was drying up so quickly, right?
It really was.
You started to see opportunities, and it was so good because like you had like mainly the first sector, right? The little hairpin. I don't know if I can call it hairpin, chicane, hairpin, whatever. It was like full of water, but the rest, like mainly in sector 3 going into the hairpin on the final straight, that one was fairly dry again with DRS. So I feel like this race had everything. Like it was going wet again, so we saw pit stops. It wasn't only like a no stop, one stop. It was quite interesting. Even the strategy just everything was quite uncertain what's going to happen. And then we had, Norris being ahead of Verstappen. I think he overtook Verstappen and he overtook Russell and he built, a 15-second gap? Over the span of 3 laps? It was insane. I thought, okay, that's done. Norris has it in the bag. But little did we know that safety car is going to come and do a little Miami switcheroo and gift Verstappen the lead back, which was, that was quite unfortunate. But it just leveled the field again. Hamilton jumped Alonso, I think, finally. So we could see the true pace of, 2 Mercedes, 2 McLarens, and 1 Red Bull, how it is typically. But yeah, even Piastri had a pretty good pace. So we didn't, after the restart, we just had the top 5 just pulling away. They were in their own league, they were pulling away from Alonso. And it was amazing racing, basically.
It really was.
They were quite conscious of their management of the tires, right? But it was amazing to watch. You just were not sure who's gonna come out ahead after the straight. You were not sure 100% who's gonna pit first for the dry tires. So we then had, I think the first one to box for the dry tires was Lewis Hamilton. And Lewis Hamilton, he went for the medium tires. They had quite the long, warm-up window. And unfortunately for him, he did not quite capitalize on the tire change. And it just caused a chain reaction.
Yeah.
Hamilton pitting, it just caused a chain reaction, right? It just made everyone nervous. And then we saw Verstappen boxing, Russell boxing, I think Piastri as well. And Norris was going on for a few laps, right?
He did.
We thought it's on, right? We thought that he's going to overcut him. And then we saw they were coming out of the pit. Norris was coming out of the pit entry, and Verstappen was, from the final straight or the first straight, he was coming into turn 1, turn 2, and then they rejoined side by side. And unfortunately for Norris, he had very cold tires and he could not do anything about it. And Verstappen ran away. Another thing in the race was the battle of the Mercedes. So we saw Russell, he was leading, right? And then he got, overtaken by Norris, blah, blah, blah. Then, Verstappen, he made the mistake. Russell made the mistake of running wide. And then we had Dart Toto saying, "Focus, George, focus."
Yeah.
That was interesting.
It was, and his voice was so loud and so clear and so crisp. It was really like Darth Vader talking directly to, his subordinates or something. Because, the difference between, because usually the race engineers, it's a bit muffled, you have some radio static or something. But he was just so clear, and he was just, "Focus, George." And he did focus, and he got a podium. But they let them fight, but Hamilton, I don't know. I don't think he's very happy with the team as a whole at the moment, honestly. I don't know what your impression is, but
yeah, I mean, as you say, it was the "Focus, George, focus." And then he was trying to overtake Piastri. And I hate to say it, but Russell it seems like a lot of the times when the pressure is on, he really just cracks. Or he makes mistakes, or he doesn't leave the room, because when he was overtaking Piastri, he just closed the door, he turned in like Piastri was not even there. That's my opinion.
Yeah.
He basically just turned in, didn't leave any space. and he should because it was not his corner. Piastri was more than alongside of his rear tires, like he was pretty much alongside almost. So that was, he then went wide and Hamilton overtook him, right? And then Hamilton cleanly overtook Piastri. So then it was like pretty surprising because Hamilton was on the hards and Russell was on the mediums. They had switched the strategy a bit because the pit stop before, Hamilton was mediums, Russell was on the hards, and yeah, it was interesting. We were thinking, right, well, is Hamilton gonna get a podium this time, right? And Russell overtook Piastri fairly quickly, and then they were told they can fight, right? And they were saying, obviously, without a mention, keep it clean. And I'm not a good judge, but I think that, you know, Hamilton fairly closed the door. He didn't, obviously, because he was fairly respectful to Russell. He left about a car's width on the right, and before George stormed in. So he just, said, you better go around the outside and try rather than and he just steamed it down the inside. He just did an Alonso of last year, which was, that was quite risky for a teammate move, I must say. But yeah, at the end of the day, if it's for a podium, I guess if he's on the mediums, Hamilton on the hards, there's nothing wrong with it per se. It was just on the more aggressive side. And Russell got the podium. Hamilton finished P4. He held his own. He finished under a second and had the fastest lap. But yeah, it seemed pretty clear that he was not happy with the weekend, with his own performance. I think, he was very disappointed in himself that he didn't deliver. He said himself, that he just came into qualifying and his tires were about 2 degrees colder than they should have been, and then he couldn't even make up the temperature in the qualifying, and his performance was poor. And he was 2.5 tenths off George, who was on pole, and Hamilton was P7, and it was very unfortunate for him, and he made some mistakes in the race. But I believe in the last stop, Hamilton asked for softs specifically. And he was given the hard tires, and I really wonder what would have happened if he actually went onto the softs, because the track wasn't abrasive after the rain. It seemed like the perfect option to put the soft on, and what's the worst case scenario is that he finished P5 behind Piastri, which probably he wouldn't. And yeah, so one could argue that they're preferring George over Lewis now, but who could fault them, right? George is clearly their number one driver going to the future. Hamilton is leaving. We don't know who's replacing him. Seems like Antonelli. But yeah, it was a interesting interaction with Mercedes, and Hamilton after the race as well. Toto gave him some words of encouragement, and he just had none of it. He just stayed quiet. What did you make of the situation? I mean, do you see it as controversial a little bit, or?
No, for a bit I thought that Hamilton was gonna walk away with it and that he was gonna take the podium. And I mean, I was kind of rooting for him, after, because he hasn't had a podium in a pretty long time. I don't know when the last race he had a podium at was. But I don't think there's any bad blood between George and Lewis per se, but I definitely think that there's something between Hamilton and the team itself. It's not as harmonious as it used to be in the years of Bottas being his number one right wing man. But they finished so close to each other. Norris, Russell and Hamilton, they were all so close. If we had more laps, I'm sure the order could have been way different as well. But it's just going to be interesting going forward as well, because up until now, it didn't really matter that much because Mercedes didn't have a very capable car, So now, but now it seems that the upgrades are working, at least to a certain degree. I mean, Russell got pole, so obviously they did something right. But it's going to be interesting to see how this affects the relationship between the two drivers. And, because now when it comes to fighting for podiums or potentially even wins, I think, some of the decency goes out the window for at least to some degree.
Yeah, for 100%. And let's not forget, Russell right now is, I think, Russell versus Hamilton in qualifying. It's what 7-1 or 8-1 in the favor of Russell, which that's tough. I mean, of course, Russell did get some priority upgrades, but it's even if you, I don't think it's a true reflection of the pace between these two drivers, because we've seen Hamilton just struggle. He usually, when he loses, he usually takes it on the chin. He says, "Look, I admit it. You just did a better job. I got to do a better job next time. I didn't have pace." But I think we're seeing something a bit different. He just doesn't. He's not gelling well with the car. It just seems like not at all for these past 3 years. And I don't know if you've seen the YouTube show, The Hot Ones, or if you have seen some clips. But yeah, he was asked by the show host, because Hamilton was in the show, and he was asked by the host that, you need to be at one with the car. When is the time when that is not the case? And he said, right now, the most.
Yeah. I saw the clip.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's very telling of, I think, Hamilton's overall feelings. Because, of course, it's not 2020 anymore. He's not the guy who wins every weekend now, but I'm sure he still has that ambition in him. And we've talked about Hamilton in some episodes that you don't want to write off Lewis Hamilton as not, capable of winning anymore, but I think he really needs a team that isn't trying to get rid of him. Well, I don't. That might be a strong, term for it. But I'm very curious to see how he fares at Ferrari with a very different working environment.
Yeah, me too. And I don't think it's a completely unfair thing to say. I think you are very right in this aspect, because I think there's two major things I see from the outside that upset Hamilton with the team and put them out of this, amazing harmony that they had over the years. One thing is that they didn't listen to him when George came into the team, when they had the W13, which was the 2022 car, the first ground effect Mercedes car. They didn't listen to him. And if you look at the Drive to Survive, it was fairly clear that, Hamilton was like, well, they basically told me to bugger off and that I'm not right. And I think that's not the environment that was really in place when there were the winning days, even when they were struggling from one race to another. And the second thing that maybe a lot of people just, maybe they cannot see it, or maybe it's not spoken about, but I think that Hamilton, he wanted to be like a brand ambassador of Mercedes. He just wanted to
another thing.
He wanted to stay with the team forever, right? He made it clear for his whole, for the whole few years that, even prior to, I don't know, what was it, 2020, he was just saying he was gonna be always a Mercedes family. And I think that Mercedes got so desperate to make the same story as Red Bull did with Verstappen, because I think that Wolff and the Mercedes team just see the same potential in Kimi Antonelli. And they feel like if they just, if they let this chance go, they're going to lose. They're just going to lose the chance to repeat or beat what they, Red Bull did with Verstappen, and they just want the same fairy tale. And that's why they have been, offering Hamilton maybe different contracts than he would have wanted to. And he took that personally, which he kind of should. And he just said, you know what, I'm just going to go to Ferrari, where he was offered something out of this world.
Exactly.
Right? And like, if you don't, I mean, it's not that they don't want him there. It's just, I think he felt the pressure of, Antonelli being in the team sooner or later. They would not kick him off, per se, right? But once he would fall off the cliff a little bit, I think that's where they would draw the line. So, yeah, that's, I think, the part of the story why they kind of fell out of love with Mercedes, or fell out of harmony.
I know it's a tragic story. It's, well, I mean, we might see the same happen with Max Verstappen. There have been speculations, a few races ago, with this harmony in the team, some discord, chaos. But, well, Adrian Newey left, but most of it seems to have blown over. Then you also have the relationship between Ferrari and Charles Leclerc. But I think that is the one that, unless something horrible happens, that is the one that will stay the strongest, because Charles is just delusional and very devoted to his team. And, it's actually quite nice to see, it's
yeah,
refreshing, in the cutthroat world of Formula One, to see such loyalty.
I agree. Yeah.
Well, but we'll see. And Ferrari overall, they seem to be getting better. But I think Spain will be a very telling weekend in terms of how everybody stands, because it's more traditional. It's not as bumpy, so Red Bull will probably be a bit stronger again. I don't think it's gonna rain, but we never know. But talking about the next race reminds me of our predictions from last week about the Canadian Grand Prix. And I don't know about you, but I nailed it again.
So what did you predict? You predicted that Perez is not going to get into Q3, right?
Exactly. Which, happened.
Yeah.
First. So, and it's very surprising that the two predictions that have worked out so far have been the ones that bet against Red Bull drivers. But, well, that's just the world that we live in right now. But what was your prediction, Ben?
Well, my prediction, a little bit unfortunately, I'm getting close, okay? Don't say anything. Don't laugh at me. Don't point at me. Well, you can. But I predicted that Lewis Hamilton is going to be on the front row, and little did I know, and I could have said that a Mercedes will be on the front row. I had a feeling that the upgrade is going to work. I thought it's going to be in the hands of Hamilton, because he's usually brilliant about, in this track. And yeah, missed out, unfortunately. But yeah, Russell was in pole, so I'm getting closer.
Wow. But what is your prediction for the next Grand Prix, which is the Spanish Grand Prix?
Well, to be really honest, I think that Barcelona is very telling in terms of the car performance, usually. It used to be, not such a long time ago, it used to be a testing track for preseason testing and stuff, and you usually had a pretty good idea about the pace of the car. So in terms of who I think is going to have the upper hand in terms of the teams, I think that in Spain it's going to be Red Bull. And I have a feeling it's going to be McLaren second, Ferrari third. And Mercedes is a bit of a dark horse. They're unpredictable at this moment. But for my prediction, I'm going to say double McLaren podium.
Interesting. I was gonna go the same route as you, and also I also have a strong belief in Red Bull in Spain, but I'm actually going to be nice to Sergio Perez after his 2 rough weekends, and I'm gonna be as bold as to say a double Red Bull podium with Perez on the second or the third step or even the first. I just feel like Spain, he'll just turn it around. And if he won't, at least we'll have something to talk about again.
Yeah, well, I hope that I've stolen your prediction and that I will get the point this time. Because I need the points very badly. And so does Perez.
You do.
So
You do.
We'll see. And we hope that you will tune in again. And thank you for your time, for listening, and for watching. Let us know if we missed anything. And we'll see you next time.
Bye.
Goodbye.